Hey, everybody. Welcome to our last meeting of the year. Everybody. Wow. So this is great to see everybody one last time for the year. This is a, oh, there he is. Yes, it's very important to see everybody and wish everybody a happy new year in person. It's going to be a little bit shorter today than normal because I have such a ridiculous amount of work right now. But this is real important to do, and it's important to carve out time for study even when you're in the midst of working. And well, when my work is also making sure everybody else gets to study Torah too. But I did want to, and of course, we are going to be reading this amazing story this week, the Akedah. I love the Caravaggio picture that I just put up for everybody. And he was a pretty interesting artist in his own right. And then this picture, I think, I'll leave that up for a little bit until we start. It's in the movie A Serious Man, which was interesting as a meditation on the book of Job by the Coen brothers. But this picture is in the Uffizi Gallery in Venice, in Florence, and yeah, it gives you nightmares, even if you're not a little kid. Isaac's face in this, but he has.
But I never pictured Abraham as bald.
Well, that's because you're not. That's because you're not bald. You have a good head of hair. The good thing about the Bible stories and the way artists portray them is the way we're supposed to, which is we're supposed to identify with them. So when you're a kid, if you read the story, you oftentimes identify with Isaac. When you become a parent, you start identifying with Abraham. So you can't help but read this story as all Torah stories, as you as part of the story. That's what you're supposed to do. Ideally, that's what you're supposed to do. For a long time, I was only Isaac, and then when I became a parent, I started asking myself, how does a parent do this? How does a parent get themselves into a situation where they're almost stopped? They almost were stopped from killing their child. So, there's an interesting way of reading the story. And so when I ask people how old Isaac is during the story, when I talk to kids about it, Isaac's always a kid. But for those who know this story pretty well, he can be anywhere from 0 to 30, well, not 0, but 1 to 37. Now, we don't assume that he's a baby because he talks to his dad during the stories. Let me explain it in 1 second. He talks to his dad during the story, and he asks him some questions, and he also carries the wood. He's old enough for that, one assumes. But we also read that his mother dies, Sarah dies right after this story. Some people actually say that her death is connected to this story. Well, she dies when she's 127. She's 90 when he's born, right? Really not supposed to have had him, but it was a miracle. And we're going to look at that right now. Well, if she's 90 and she's 127 when she dies, that means the oldest he could be would be 37. And if he was actually old enough, if he was old as he was when his mother died, then he was 37, which totally changes your idea of this story, of course, because this is no longer a child that goes through this, but a young man. And the reason is we're going to see, is it doesn't tell us how much time elapsed from the previous story. So we're going to take a look.
Rabbi, also at that time there was human sacrifices going on too, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So everything that we see in this is possible and is a possibility, unfortunately, because as Mike Schwartz just shared, this isn't an aberration. This is actually standard operating procedure. Sacrificing a child was, at least for the Canaanites, pretty typical. We're going to look at the first part of the story today, the part that we normally don't look at. The second part of the story, I'm going to invite you back on Saturday morning, Sunday morning. I almost said Shabbat morning. Shabbat morning is the first day of Rosh Hashanah. The second, that's when we're actually going to be broadcasting a service. But Sunday, we're going to have a live discussion like this on Zoom. And I need you all to be there if you can. I need you to be there on Sunday morning at 10 because this is one of the things we're doing live for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I want to have as many people as possible for that. Later on that day, we're actually doing a live event. We're actually outdoor event, in-person event. I don't like to say in-person because that scares some people, but we're going to be having an event where we actually get to see people with our eyes. I don't want to say touch people because I don't want to scare anybody, but we're going to be doing our tashlich and also hearing the sound of the shofar at 2:00 in our normal and so this is the only outdoor event we'll be able to do. So we want you to be able to be there for that.
Rabbi, is CBS going to be there too?
No, I don't. They didn't know. Quite frankly, we usually do it with CBS. This is a little different. I don't know what they're going to be doing. We are doing this, and quite frankly, we can't really have another synagogue there because then that will probably not allow for safe social distancing. So a little different this year, but
because I know they're having it and it's behind the Arco. I'm just not sure when.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know when they're doing it, and I don't know what they ended up doing. But I think they had the same concern that if everybody comes there at the same time, it could be a little bit of a mess. But I will tell you this: we have a, we always do this. I mean, we always do the tashlich outside. We always do it in a place that allows for people to be right next to their family, next to somebody else if they want to, but also there's enough space there for other people to do it. There's really nowhere else we could do it. And so it worked out well. We talked about maybe doing it at some other places, but really this is the best place for us. So that's Sunday at 2:00, tashlich. More importantly, again, that's where we cast away our sins, and we'll also hear the sound of the shofar. So you'll actually be able to hear the sounds of the shofar live. You'll hear them during the service on Saturday and Sunday. We're going to be broadcasting a service where we have an amazing amazing shofar blower, Aaron Drew, who's going to blow the shofar and blow your mind at the same time. But he's a younger guy, but he's amazing at blowing the shofar. And anyways, I'll just say that we also wanted to see it and hear it live. So we have an abbreviated class today, and I want, again, to tell you that the part that we are reading this week, that we would be reading this week, which is the Torah portion for Rosh Hashanah, we are going to do on Rosh Hashanah live. Again, for those who just jumped in just now, Sunday at 10:00 in the morning, probably about an hour and a half, we'll read the chapter 22. It's only 26 verses, 24 verses, but it's really, really powerful. And we will delve in and dive into the Akedah, the binding.
Will you be sending us a thing to Zoom number and stuff?
Yep, but you got it tonight. Actually,
it went out this afternoon.
If everybody looks at your emails, the information. What are you saying, Harvey? You're shaking your head.
I thought it was this email. It's a different one?
It's in that email.
Oh, okay.
So everybody, let me rephrase that. Well, let me emphasize, not rephrase. Everybody on this call, with the exception of our friends in Texas right now, everybody who's a member of the synagogue or who's reserved ticket space, everybody got the information on how to go on and log on, and you can log on now to see how it logs on. And in that email, also it says how to get on the Zoom with the link for the Zoom. So I know it's confusing. I didn't want to make it too confusing. I worked real hard with Harvey, who's on the call, to try to make it not confusing, but it might be still confusing. There are no times listed for anything other than the things that are live because we're going to post things up and then once they're up, you can go on. So it says from such and such a time, from 5 o'clock on, I'll just tell you because Francine just texted me, from 5 o'clock on in the evening, the services will be up. From 8 o'clock in the morning, the services will be up.
Rabbi, about how long are the services?
They're not finished yet. They're not done yet. No, I will tell you that they're close to about an hour, between an hour and an hour and 20 minutes. So they're not longer than an hour and 20 minutes, but they are as they're not 100% done, but they look really oh, you'll enjoy them. They look really good, and well, of course I'm going to tell you that, but I think it'll help make this year hopefully start off on the Jewish calendar. Will start off right for you. I'm hoping. So I'm going to share with you now the part of the Torah that we're going to be reading from today. As you've had this picture to look at and to stare at and to scare you, it's now time to actually look at the text. And again, this is chapter 21. We usually don't read this, by the way, in synagogue. We don't. We usually jump into chapter 22. So this is a little different for us. I mean, we studied this before, but this is the part that people usually don't study very much, which is what happens just before the Akedah. But I think to appreciate the Akedah, to appreciate the binding of Isaac, it does help to actually read this part, which is what happens for Isaac to get into the world in the first place. So hold it one second. Let me bring up our. Oh, no.
Are you going to go live on Facebook?
Thank you for reminding me. I will do that too, because I'm going to share with everybody the Torah first, which is going to come right up and get this scary picture away from you all, so you can go back to hopefully not. But listen, I mean, you're supposed to be scared with the story. And let me now also put this up on Facebook for everybody, so you'll actually see this little Facebook deal, so that you know that we'll be able to. Everybody else will be able to join us. And by the way, the services are not going to be up on Facebook because we're basically making it for our members and for people who have tickets. So that doesn't mean we won't post some of the stuff up on Facebook, but not live like we normally do with Shabbat and pretty much everything else. So this is, to use the fancy phrase, we've monetized it. That's the hold on one second. It should be going up, and it is going up. All right, everybody, let's take a look at the Torah and not the Facebook feed. So this chapter 21 comes right after chapter 20. Who would have thought? But no, what happens at the end of chapter 20 is that Abraham has a situation with Avimelech, who's the king of the Canaanites, a Canaanite king, I should say, a king of Canaanite extraction. And we see a revisit of the story of Abraham in Egypt, where he pretends that Sarah is his wife in order to protect himself and her. And then there's a situation here where Avimelech, the king, goes through the same thing the Pharaoh does. He gets hit by a plague. He prays, or basically finds out why he has it, and Abraham ends up telling him what happens, and everything has a kind of a happy ending. I think. I don't know. It's still a weird story. Not one that we talk to the kids about. The problem, of course, is that the next line of the Torah in chapter 21 says, "The Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken." Well, seeing as how we just had a story that Sarah is almost raped or taken advantage of, or sexually the conquest of a king, it is interesting that in the very next verse, we have this important line that Sarah gets pregnant. And it's, of course, we're told that right away that Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham. Not simply that she got pregnant, but that she bore a child to Abraham. And so it says that Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne him, the name Isaac. Now, what's so important about this, of course, is that Abraham names his son, gives him the name Isaac, which means laughter, which is ironic or maybe connected to the fact that she laughed when she found out she was going to be pregnant with him. Of course, Isaac is not someone who has a lot of laughter and joy in his life. He's almost sacrificed. His children play a horrible trick on him and trick him into blessing the wrong child. Not great things happen to this guy during his life, though he does live the longest of all the patriarchs. But his name's somewhat ironic. That this, again, doesn't seem to be a guy who has a lot of fun or laughter. But maybe he did, just not the parts that we read about. But it also tells us that it clearly is Abraham's son. And one of the things that the rabbis pointed out in the Midrash and the explanations is that Abraham and Isaac were like identical. Like when Abraham, you looked in the mirror, when Abraham looked at him, it looked just like him. And of course, why? So that there wouldn't be any confusions. There wouldn't be anybody that says, maybe that's Avimelech's son. So it's very clear that Abraham is the father, which again, it doesn't always say in the Torah that bore a son to Abraham. Sometimes it just says the woman had a child. Well, here it says very clearly he bore it to Abraham. So there's no word that's unnecessary in the Torah. And it says here that in verse 4, when Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him. The first child that is circumcised at 8 days for the trivial pursuit is Isaac, not Abraham, because Abraham's in his 90s when he circumcises himself. Well, actually, he's an older man when he circumcises when he's commanded to circumcise, and of course he does it to himself. But now Isaac, his firstborn, is done. It goes through the circumcision in 8 days. So Sarah, right here again, reminds people. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me," which seems to be again why his name is Yitzchak, laughter. And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children, yet I have borne a son in his old age," which again reminds us that, again, these people were normally would not have physically been able to have kids. So now we get into this interesting tale of what happens to Isaac as a child. It's one of the only stories we know about Isaac, and I'm going to say period, because we don't know a lot about Isaac. We don't hear a lot about him as a patriarch. We're introduced to him here in chapter 21. And by chapter 25, 26, we've now moved to Jacob, his son. And so there's not a lot of Torah about him. There's just not. The whole last we talked about this in our Midrash class yesterday, actually. The whole last half of the book of Genesis, from 25, 26, all the way to 50, literally half the book of Genesis is about Jacob and his family. It's Jacob through Joseph. That's half the book of Genesis. And the first time we hear about Abraham is chapter 12. And he's still here, obviously, through chapter about 22, 23. We're reading about Abraham, 24. Then we get introduced. So it really goes from the early leaders and people like Noah. That ends in chapter 11. Then we have Abraham for about the next 10 chapters. And then we have like 2 or 3 chapters about Isaac. And then it goes right into Jacob for 25 chapters. So we don't have much. This is one of those few stories. We have this little tale, and it's definitely an important one, which is why, again, we have it, but it's very short. Let's take a look at it. The child grew up and was weaned. So it's kind of connected to the previous verse about suckling, so that Sarah didn't just give birth, she nursed him. And Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. How old was he? We don't know exactly. But we do know that normally when we hear about weaning during the biblical period, that we assume that it was actually maybe two or three at the oldest, that he was weaned. So this is a party for him when he is at an age where he's not a tiny little infant, right? It's not a bris. It's not a pidyon haben, which we do at 30 days for boys. He's, a couple years old. And who's here with him? Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham plain. He's not named here as Ishmael, but we heard his name earlier as Ishmael. And so Ishmael would have been about 15. He's a teenager by this time. He's about 13 years older than his brother Isaac. So there's a big age gap, but he's not in his 20s, but he's a teenager. And it says that he's playing with him. Notice again that the Hebrew for this is metzachek, the same root as Yitzchak. So here we have laughter, playing, and the name Isaac. But think about what may have been happening here. The rabbis actually say that this is not good kind of playing. This is roughhousing. And that might be a good way of saying it, because in some of the rabbinical commentaries, that Ishmael is doing something even worse here, which is that he's actually molesting his brother. Now, before you say, well, where would that even come from? Well, first of all, the Bible does speak in euphemisms. It doesn't actually doesn't really have a word for sexual molestation. It has a word for rape and it has a word for playing, but it doesn't have anything for maybe a kind of an in-between situation, which is where it's at this point. But the rabbis point out something interesting, which is why would Ishmael even be doing this to Isaac? And that is for a very logical reason, which is that if Isaac can have children, then he can have an inheritance and a lineage. And if Isaac doesn't have the lineage, then Ishmael is the one who he gets to be the one who inherits. He gets to be the one that gets the blessing. So there is this kind of background story here that this was actually pretty serious. This wasn't just a game. And it's all based on this issue, which is that Sarah sees it and she said to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not have an inheritance with my son Isaac. So whatever happens, Sarah at this point says, I don't want them around anymore. And I definitely don't want this guy to inherit any of my son's property. Well, this is problematic for a lot of reasons. And you can see the matter distressed Abraham greatly. And it says, me'od. He wasn't just like concerned. He was really concerned. It really bothered him, for it concerned a son of his. Ishmael was his son. And not only that, he's only his son because Sarah was the one who recommended this arrangement in the first place. This was a son that Abraham never would have had if it wasn't for Sarah saying, take my handmaiden and have a son with her. So this is really a problem. And this is, again, not the first time that Sarah has said, get rid of Hagar. We have another version of this story, which again is either by a different author or it's a version of this story that kind of is amplifies the fact that Sarah really wanted her gone once she had a baby. So keep that in mind. So this matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. So God says, you got to do what Sarah says. It's maybe not as compassionate as you'd like God to be saying at this point, but God does say, as for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed. So God says they're going to be cared for, okay? So Abraham knows that when he sends them away. He doesn't find this out after he sends them away. He's told, do it, and then if you do it, everything will be okay. Now, what's interesting about this story is it kind of explains why Ishmael isn't part of the immediate family. It also kind of shows us not a great side of Sarah, if you will. But I will say the sages made a very interesting point about the story that happens next, which is that if Abraham had drawn a line in the sand and said, I'm not sending my son away, would God have tested Abraham in the next scene? Now, I'm not making that up. I'm not saying I came up with this idea, but there are people who've been talking about that possibility for thousands of years, that maybe the Akedah is based on this line right here. Do as she says, right? And him not saying anything. Him not saying, but I can't do that. He's my son. I can't let my teenage son go away and never see him again. I'm only telling you, maybe it's a more modern interpretation, or modern, we like it in the modern world, but it's not a modern interpretation. It's a classic midrash. It's a classic explanation for why the Akedah even happens. And again, we'll read the very beginning today. God says when we know right at the beginning that it's a test, that God is testing him. But maybe he's testing him because he wants to see whether he'll do it again. What will he do? I tested him. Maybe this is a test. It doesn't say it, but maybe it's a test. Maybe Abraham had to. Because then it begs this other question, which maybe is more of a modern interpretation too. What happens if Ishmael doesn't become Ishmael? What if he doesn't become the ancestor of the Arab people? What if the Arabs don't come about through Ishmael? What happens? What happens to human history? It's an interesting question. Obviously one that is very relevant today. I don't know. Again, it depends on when you stop the record, where you are when it stops. So it says early the next morning, and by the way, that's the same phrase that we're going to read in the Akedah. Early the next morning, vayasken, early the next morning. It's kind of eerie. Early the next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheva, which is where he was. It's in the area. Again, in the southern part of Israel today, in the Negev and the desert. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away. For she thought, let me not look on as the child dies. And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears. By the way, maybe not the best parenting either, by the way. I want to point that out, and people have pointed that out before. You don't let your child, even if you think they're going to die, why would you let your child die alone? So, I mean, you can understand she didn't want to see it, but it seems a little, I mean, it doesn't seem exactly like what a parent would want to do. Let their child die while you're sitting over there so you don't have to see it. I'm just telling you, it's been pointed out. And it says she burst into tears, right? So she is sad. I mean, she's upset about it, but is it not a little selfish that she doesn't want to see it? Anyways, God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from the heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the cry of the boy where he is. Interesting word, right? Where he is. It doesn't just say he heard the cry of the boy. God heard the cry of the boy, the angel says, right? But where he is. And there are commentaries about that. Why does it say where he is? Again, where he is, is not where she is. We know that. We read that physically, but also maybe not emotionally or spiritually. Maybe he wasn't quite as alone as she says he is. Notice, by the way, here an angel, a malach Adonai, the angel of God. Also in that story of Isaac, it's an angel that interferes at the end when Isaac is almost about to die. A lot of similarities here, folks. You see a lot more when you get to read both stories. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. According to Islamic tradition, Arab tradition, that this well of Zamzam is one of the holy places that Muslims go to when they go on pilgrimage. There's only one problem. That's in Saudi Arabia. This is not in Saudi Arabia. So clearly their well is not the same well, but that never stopped people from creating a good tourist opportunity. And obviously making a Hajj pilgrimage is a major thing for every Muslim to do. So there is a place where they believe this happened that you go to in Saudi Arabia. Doesn't seem possible since she's in Beersheva, but what do you want me to tell you? They wanted Ishmael on their turf. Remember, Hagar is an Egyptian. It says she's an Egyptian slave. Actually, it pointed that out in this story again, because it didn't call him his wife. It called him a slave. By the way, there is a midrash. I want to say it's not an Arab or Islamic midrash either. There is Islamic midrash, by the way. The Hadith is a collection of Islamic stories written about the Quran, additions or explanations. But this is actually a Jewish tradition about this, which is that Hagar is actually not a slave in the sense that, she's not a wife in the normal sense, but she's not from slave beginnings. There's actually a midrash that she is the daughter of Pharaoh, that when Pharaoh was getting Abraham out of town after his incident with Sarah, that he gave him one of his own daughters to marry or as a concubine. So that's partly based on the idea that they didn't like the rabbis didn't like the idea that Abraham has a common slave girl that he's having babies with. So Hagar may have been, again, according to the Midrash, not just your typical slave girl, but she's the ancestor of the Ishmaelites, the Arabs. And so this story is important in the Quran and in Arab tradition and Islamic tradition. And so this is their origin story. And so the Quran is different, tells this story differently, but there is a version of this story in the Quran based on the Torah. It's clearly based on the Torah and, by the way, on the Midrash, because the Midrash already existed by the time the Quran was written. Talmud already existed, by the way, by the time the Quran was written. So by the time the Quran was ever written down, the Talmud already existed, was already completed. Just understand that's how old the Talmud is, and also relative to the Torah, how much time had elapsed. So here you have a situation where Hagar is saved, essentially to some extent, by the angel, and everything kind of seems like it's going to be okay. He grew up and became a bowman, and that is the Hebrew word rovet kashat, which is a hunter or a bowman, somebody who uses a bow and arrow, which of course in the ancient world was the equivalent of a hunter or a soldier or somebody who in today's kind of, to use the analogy from today, was a guy who'd walk around armed all the time. And one would say that that's probably indicative of somebody who is fighting a lot. And again, according to Arab history, there was continuous fighting between Arab tribesmen until Muhammad. Why did Muhammad succeed as a religious leader? Because he was a successful political leader. He finally got the Arab tribes to stop fighting each other and essentially became a political and spiritual leader because, again, they had been killing each other for centuries. So the Torah says this, Islamic Arab history says this, and again, it is an interesting feature for our discussions and for politics today. It is part of the background, by the way. It is part of it's part of our story, and it's part of their story. So consider that, by the way, that for us, the first time we're again introduced to the Arab people, to the ancestor of the Arabs, and again also by extension Muslims, it's as a guy who's at war or fighting a lot or armed at the very least. It says he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt, which is again where she came from. So he's married, and it seems like she has at least enough power or wealth, if you will, to be able to get a wife from the land of Egypt. And then that is Ishmael. That is really much of what we learn about Ishmael. And interestingly, we're 22 verses into this chapter, and as you can see, there's 12 more verses. It's not really a story about Isaac either. It's a story of how Isaac winds up not having a brother or half brother. So it's not really a story about Isaac. I will tell you that it is ironic that of this chapter, one of the only chapters about Isaac, there's about 3 verses about Isaac. So this next part goes back to Avimelech, who is the Canaanite king. And this is again, around the same time, it says Vayehi ba'et hahi, around that time. So it doesn't say after time has elapsed. It's really close to that time. Avimelech and Phicol, chief of his troops, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my kith and kin, which again is a fancy way of saying, again, with my family and with my people, but will deal with me and with the land in which you have sojourned as loyally as I have dealt with you. Well, it's arguable that Avimelech has always treated him well, but he's trying to make sure that they're on the same page, that they'll be friends, because clearly Isaac, good things are happening for him. Now we assume again his flocks are increasing, that he's successful, that people can see that that Abraham is doing well. Isaac is now born, and his family's growing, and at least it looks like Abraham is going to make it, and he, more than make it. I mean, he's well respected. So Abraham says, I swear it. And Abraham reproached Abimelech for the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. So again, they had a well which was supposed to be Abraham's, and Abimelech's people took the well from them. Abimelech said, I do not know who did this, which is, of course, is what every great leader does. Says, I have no idea where this happened. You did not tell me, nor have I heard of it until today. I didn't know. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a pact. And it says, Abraham then set 7 ewes of the flock by themselves, 7 of these sheep. And I'm just seeing if what it said. It says Kevsot Atson. So these are female sheep. And Avimelech said to Abraham, what mean these 7 ewes which you've set apart? He replied, you are to accept these 7 ewes for me as proof that I dug this well. So I dug the well, you guys took it, I'm taking it back, and you're going to tell me right now that this is my well and you won't come back and get it. Because there were 7 sheep that were done, were part of this pact, if you will, that the place is called Beersheva, for the 2 of them swore an oath. The word Sheva is an oath, but it's also 7. So it has 2 meanings. Sheva is Hebrew for 7, but it's also one of the words for an oath. It's not the only word for an oath. The other word we have is neder, like is kol nidre, all of our oaths or promises. We actually have a few words for oath or promise in Hebrew, which is interesting. It shows you how important it is to us in Hebrew. But this seems to be more of, again, of a pact, of a, not not necessarily a promise to God, like a vow, like something we vow to God, like a neder, but we do have the word in the Kol Nidre prayer. It says Kol Shavuot, which sounds like it means weeks, but it actually in that case means Shavuot. All of I don't know how they translate Shavuot, because it's usually translated with some synonym for pact, but it's not. They don't usually use pact for that, because we usually translate it as promises. I have my machshel right here, so I can tell you what the word is. But again, Shavuot is another word for an oath. But the two of them swore an oath of 7. So it's a double. It's a double pun. It's a play on the word. And let me just see. Since I'm here on Kol Nidre, it says, and remember this is in Aramaic. They translate is all vows, oaths, and promises. So it is well, here's something interesting. I just realized something. In Kol Nidre, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Interesting, 7 words. There are 7 words which are used for oaths or promises in that first line. Kol Nidre, V'asure, V'charume, V'chinume, V'chinuye, V'chinuse, and then it's Ushavuot. And that's the word that we just read, Sheva. I just realized something. Almost every translation of this prayer that I've ever seen, there aren't enough synonyms in English for promises. So it says all vows, oaths, and promises. It shows you we have so many words for oath or promise in Hebrew that we don't have enough synonyms in English. I've never really thought of that before, that we don't have enough words for it. We run out of synonyms, so we usually only have 3. We toss out the 3 that we have, but vows, oaths, and promises. Interesting, by the way, that we have so many words for that word, in that concept, or that word has how many words in Hebrew for it, and Aramaic, by the way. Those are Hebrew and Aramaic. Interesting, right? Just how they say that the Eskimos have a lot of words for snow because they have so many different kinds of snow. And we have so many different promises in Judaism. I don't know. You can go a lot of different ways for why that is. I mean, maybe that's why we have so many attorneys amongst our people, because we have so many different contracts and different agreements that somebody could go into. We have to have a lot of words for something that has nuances, obviously, that we don't have in English. Interesting, though. I never thought of that. So there you go. There's a new little thing you learned today. So there's 7 words in Kol Nidre for oaths, and we only usually use 3. I don't know. I'll look for some other mock source to see if they've come up with some other good ones. So the place is called Beersheva. And it says, when they concluded the pact at Beersheva, Avimelech and Phicol, chief of his troops, departed and returned to the land of the Philistines. Yes, sorry. So these are actually Philistines, not Canaanites, Philistines, living in the Canaanites, but technically Philistine kings, which means that they are, again, non-Israelite. They're not of Abraham's people. They're not Abraham's family. And they are strangers. They're technically people who Abraham knows in the back of his mind. He doesn't need to make pacts with these people. God promised it to me. So for me to make a pact for anything in this land, whether you're a Canaanite, Philistine, whatever else, it's kind of ridiculous because I own this land. For me to have to make a pact with you is a kind of, I'm kind of being nice. And maybe I'm being careful because there's more of you right now than there are of me. But the reality is I know that this is my land and it's been promised to me. And it says that Abraham planted a tamarisk at Beersheva and invoked there the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines for a long time. So again, the Philistines usually lived along the coast. Beersheva is further inland. It's more, again, of where Canaanites would have lived. But again, maybe Canaanites, Philistines trading off living in that area. But it does tell us that, again, Abraham lived amongst people that were numerically stronger than him, bigger than him. And what does he do? He doesn't build any cities. He doesn't take any property himself. He buys one thing, the cave of Machpelah, the place where his family is going to be buried. That's the only place that he actually kind of claims and puts a stake in the ground. But he does something here. He plants a tree. He plants a tamarisk. He plants this tree and he says, this is God's land. And he does it by planting a tree. And it's one of the reasons why for us, planting trees in Israel is, again, being in the mode and in following our ancestor Abraham, in making a place ours by not by putting a building on it, but by putting a tree in it. It's a pretty wild idea, and it's one that again reminds us of how we value the land of Israel. Is not a place of again. It's not just about buildings. It's about life, and it's about bringing life to an area which, again, Beersheva, the Israelis have completely transformed the area of Beersheva into a living, breathing city. And it's one of the areas that Israel is trying to, again, make as a centerpiece for the growth of Israel over the next generations, that hopefully people will move further south and take pressure off the infrastructure along the coast in Tel Aviv and Haifa and even off of Jerusalem into Beersheva and to develop that area. And what's so cool about this all is that it is all, when there's some areas around there where Bedouin live, but nobody can claim that there was any Palestinian cities or villages or towns or whatever. This is all literally arid land. And Israel is using amazing water reclamation and the highest tech to make Beersheva a place of life there for the generations to come. So it's an inspiring part of Israel to see. It's going to be, if Israel has its way, which I'm sure it will, it's going to be one of the areas of the future and where people will be living in the future. And it is very far away. Well, I shouldn't say very far away, because nothing there is very far away from contested or problem areas. Beersheva is close to Gaza, but it's not close to the West Bank or to, again, Judea, Samaria, to that area. Interestingly, Tel Aviv and the coastal areas during the time of Abraham and even during the time of King David were inhabited more by Philistines than by Jews. Today, it's almost the exact opposite. Most of the Palestinians and most Arabs don't live along the coast, but we Jews do live along the coast, mainly because, of course, go to the beach. You can be part of the cities that are cultural hubs for Israel, and those are Tel Aviv, obviously, and Haifa in the north. So who knows what will happen in Beersheva, this area. The next verse, which is what we're going to read on Sunday, it says, sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test. And he said to him, Avraham, and Avraham said, Hineni, which is the word that we have to say every day of our lives, but especially during the high holidays. Here I am, Hineni, I'm ready. So hopefully all of us can say that right now, that you're ready. You're in the right frame of mind to enter into the high holidays. Yeah, we are on the last hours before this year comes to a close. And I know for most of us, we really like to put this year behind us, like to get a fresh start, and hopefully we're ready for it. And again, we hope that this year is going to be filled with a lot of opportunity for everybody, that it's going to be filled, obviously, most importantly, with good health and the lack of fear. It's definitely one of the things I want to talk about. I'm going to share a little bit over the high holidays, is a message that we got to get out of this fear and uncertainty, and we have to start. We have to break that cycle of fear, which leads to anger. It leads to distrust. It leads to violence, and we have to get out of this uncertainty. And that's my hope. Is of all the things that I pray for, with obviously health and safety and security and peace for everybody, and again, mostly health and safety. But I really hope for a change in that, and that of anything this year, I hope that we break out of this feeling of insecurity and uncertainty that people have. It's not healthy for us, and we can't keep doing it. We can't maintain this forever. This constantly not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, and worried that someone's going to take away something from us tomorrow, and whatever. We can't. It's got to stop. So please let it stop soon. Folks, I'm going to get back to work. I'm going to get back to hopefully a chance to bring as much light to everybody for the new year, and hopefully all of you will find ways to do that as well. I hope that again that we all do the work of repentance and bringing ourselves closer to each other and to God, and to as a country, to bring ourselves closer together too. So for anyone or everyone, please accept my apologies for not reaching my potential, and either again, whether I've hurt you or not been able to do what I needed to do for you. I apologize, and I don't like doing that in a group setting, but it's not a large group setting. there's not that many of you there right now, but I wouldn't do it for much more than that. So thank you.
And you can see us one at a time.
I do. I can look at you, each one of you,
Yes.
over each one of you. But again, it is wonderful to have, especially I want to say thank you to all the people who are in different time zones. And Diane, I don't even know where you are right now. Are you?
I came back home today, this afternoon. I'm home.
Well, we're glad you're back safe. Diane was in Kansas just yesterday, I think. So
Welcome back.
We're glad you're back safe. And again, I also especially want to thank Harvey, who, everybody's been working hard, but Harvey has been working hard for all of you, for this synagogue. Harvey is our vice president and has been working, also has been working as our treasurer to make sure everything could get done. And he has been working kind of with me as also executive director of the synagogue to make sure that all the website stuff was up. We implemented a new system about a month ago to help us with donations and help us with ticketing and all those kind of things. And it's working so far great, but could not have been done without Harvey. So thank you, Harvey. Thank you, everyone, for making sure that our synagogue can function. But Harvey in particular has put in so much time. So thank you. I mean, so much time.
Thank you. And thank you for making me a renewed member.
You got it. No problem, Joyce.
Thank you very much. I have one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Has anyone contacted Doreen to get a membership? She wanted to join. Remember, Doreen? I sent you her email and her phone.
Yeah, I sent it to.
What's the last name?
Shine. Doreen Shine. She wanted to become a member.
I don't know if Harvey. I don't know if
she's getting notices. I don't know.
She's definitely getting notices, but I don't know if she got a call specifically. She should have. And I know that Joanne has her number, but Harvey has not been. Harvey's been handling everything, but he's been handling a little bit of membership, but more after people have joined. But so he hasn't seen. I know he hasn't yet because he sent me an email. But
I talked to her about it, but I didn't know what was the next step.
No, she hopefully is. But I'll send her information to Harvey too. Everybody should have it. So and actually, one of the things it says right here, she's a good friend of Joyce Schulman. So
that's right.
I will. Yeah, I can see who got this. Harvey was about the only person who did not get this. It was our president.
Uh-oh.
No, but he was our president, and he should not have necessarily had this, but he's got enough on his plate. But he now will have it as well. So
I'll contact her in the morning.
Okay, I've talked to her about membership, and she wants to be involved, and she has offered to hold a grief class with me, co-lead.
Wow. Well, that is something that Joyce, I didn't want to put her on the spot, but since she's put herself on the spot,
I did. It's okay.
That's something she's going to be doing this coming year. Is we're looking forward to Joyce facilitating a grief group for our synagogue, and we haven't done one in a long time. So you can start letting people know. We don't know the date yet. We don't know the start date and
Well,
time.
we haven't talked details yet, but I would like to, right after the holidays.
So that will be
We'll
coming up.
talk about it.
Yep, it is right there. Top of the list is right after our holidays is to make sure that that happens. So again, this is a really good thing to, for us to be, for all of us to be thinking about is how to help out our community. And I'm looking at it right now. It says October 1st, Grief Group Joyce. So
Yes, we'll talk about it and we'll schedule it because.
And Rabbi, you never were on Facebook.
are you kidding me? After all that? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I wonder, oh my gosh.
That's life.
Well,
I think we should start the class over again.
have to do it again. All right, folks. Take care, everybody. Shana Tova. Happy New Year, please.
Right.
And everybody.
Shana Tova. Shana
Love you
Tova.
all.
Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Rabbi.
To everybody. Be well.